What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back on our regularly scheduled programming, which means Kang, Only Myself Left to Conquer, part 3? Is this part 3? I can't remember, but whatever the next part is, that's the part we're doing here. Now, I was reading over the comments of the previous videos after I got back, and I noticed that some of you guys were a little confused in terms of how the whole Kang the Conqueror thing works and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so as you guys know, when it comes to Marvel Comics, the main Marvel universe is Earth 616, right? That's well established. You guys have all pretty much known that for quite some time. What you have is you do have a Nathaniel Richards from Earth 616, but that is the Nathaniel Richards known as the father of Reed Richards. So if you ever read Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four run, that's Nathaniel. Right now, he does have time-traveling escapades and so on and so forth, and he was part of Kang War, different things along those lines. But when you think of Kang the Conqueror, right, Prime Kang, if we want to call him that, the main Kang the Conqueror who goes back in time and fights the Avengers and all that kind of stuff, he comes from a reality called Earth 6311. This story, as it's being told, is basically the origin of Kang. The difference here is that unlike what a lot of the stuff that you read before, it's designed to basically rework his origins slightly, as well as massively rework characters like Ravonna Renslayer. And the reason for that is because coming out of the Loki TV show, Ravonna Renslayer is a very popular character, or at least pretty popular, way more than she ever was in the comics. And so there was a lot of confusion with her character in the comics. If Loki had literally ended and said, for more about Ravonna Renslayer, go read Marvel Comics as she exists right now, it would confuse the piss out of people. They would have no idea where to start or which version of her it is or anything like that. It was a massively complicated thing, right? She was just kind of thrown in there with the time-traveling escapades of Kang, and there was no real explanation given insofar as how it all ties together. This story corrects that. The other part of that is that where this story focused on answering the question, this idea that when Kang the Conqueror was a teenager, some future version of himself just showed up and said, I'm going to turn you into me, that where it had focused on younger Kang trying not to become his older self. This video right here is where everything begins to shift. So in the last video that we covered, we had basically talked about how it was really younger Kang ending up in ancient Egypt and coming across Rama-tut, who, as you guys know, was Kang the Conqueror going back to ancient Egypt and then basically trying to rule there and then conquer the earth from that point going forward. Ultimately, though, there was a great big war taking place between Kang the Conqueror and Apocalypse. And so as a result of that, what you ended up having was younger Kang who basically allied himself with what appeared to be Ravonna Renslayer in ancient Egypt, and then in turn helping Apocalypse fend off and really defeat the forces of Rama-tut. Of course, with Kang basically fleeing back to his present after being defeated by the Fantastic Four, who would time travel to that time period. Again, we had covered more of that in the video, so if that's a little confusing to you, I invite you to go back and check out that video. The thing about it is that after that whole conflict is ended, right, that adult Kang fled back to his own time, and all you're left with is younger Kang here. In that whole series of events, that whole calamity, Ravonna Renslayer had effectively died. And so as a result of that, because Ravonna Renslayer had basically appeared intermittently throughout the time stream and really defied anything regarding like the laws of aging or anything like that, and no explanation has been given yet, which we'll get an explanation on that. Basically you have young Kang who's in love with Ravonna Renslayer. He has a vendetta against his older self, and then he also wants to find a way to save Ravonna. So what he ends up doing is making a deal with Apocalypse. Now, as you guys know, Apocalypse as a villain, this guy's nothing if not just beholden to evolution, right? The guy believes in social Darwinism. Only the strongest deserve to survive. It's one of the reasons why Apocalypse is a little hypocritical in some ways. On one hand, he'll make these grandiose speeches about how evolution will have its due, and only those who are able to deal with, strength and show how capable they are the ones who deserve to live. All the while, he basically used the techno-organic virus as it was given to him by Cable, albeit inadvertently, to interface with celestial technology and grant himself all these powers. So if he was really living up to his own belief system, he never would have done that. He would have just used whatever powers had been naturally given to him to find some way to be a conqueror. So basically, it's a long way for me to say that when it comes to his life philosophy, Apocalypse is full of shit. So the thing about this is that what he does is he tells Nathaniel, like, I will give you the ability to travel forward in time, right? To travel to, your future or whatever time period you need to go to, but you will not do it using some kind of time machine or anything like that. You will do it at the whims and wants of time herself. And so instead of him just being given the ability to travel into the future by way of some sort of machine or something like that, he's actually encased in a sarcophagus and left there for like thousands of years, where he just kind of goes forward, right? Literally just sitting there in this case. Now, the thing about it is that Kang doesn't really say that this is any kind of a torture. I mean, psychologically it is to a degree, but in order to keep himself from going insane, he steals himself, right? He says, time is a thing to be conquered. That was the edge of Kang's knife, not tactics, nor technology, nor superpowers, nor brutality, time travel. But even without a machine, we all travel through time slowly and ever forward. So with my flesh protected from age by Apocalypse's arcane technology, but my mind restlessly aware, I did that one thing that Kang would find abhorrent. I took the long way around. And all the while, I sharpened my mind and steeled my focus. I had many coming victories to contemplate, but I was drawn particularly to the failures, the ones I had been trained to prevent. I contemplated Ravana, the mystery of her name echoing on my elder self's lips, and of meeting my own Ravana in the distant past. I shed my boyhood to make myself her murderer's undoing. And finally, in the shadow of 26,964 years of preparation, meditation, and patience, I arrived. And so he basically shows up here in what's essentially the modern era, right? The modern day. And when I say the modern day, I mean like the Avengers in the 1960s, really is really what I'm referring to here. But when he arrives here, this sarcophagus, of course, is discovered, and of course, he ends up breaking out and so on and so forth. But as he's here, of course, he overhears a news blip on the radio from J. Jonah Jameson, where basically there's some kind of UFO, right? A hovercraft out there that's just like wreaking havoc, and the Avengers are fighting it, and so on and so forth. And when they don't quite know what to make of it, and in fact, Jameson asks a question like, is it invaders from outer space? Kang is like, no, that's my future self who's arrived here with the intention of attacking the Avengers team. Now, what's really, really interesting about this, and this is what's really, really cool, is that you have younger Kang who shows up to this vessel. Now, in his mind, he doesn't spend a whole lot of time with the Avengers. They're really more of an afterthought here. And that's one of the things that's so cool about this story, is whenever we traditionally read comic books, the Avengers or somebody like that, they're always in some capacity the main focus, right? Like, here's a Spider-Man story where Peter Parker's doing his thing and something happens and some villain shows up and, you know, whatever, he's really, really strong. Peter can't do it on his own, so here come the Avengers, and now it's a team-up book. You don't really see instances where it's just like, and there are the Avengers over there doing something. Let's go back to what it is that we're doing here. Like, you never really see that all the time, right? And it's really, I really enjoy, it's one of the things that I love about books like this, is it's basically Kang, like younger Kang, who's like, I gotta fight my older self. And it's cool to see the Avengers, because I remember seeing them when I was a little kid, way, you know, in the far-flung future, you know, when he's from the 31st century, but he's like, I remember seeing them as a little kid, studying about them and like the museum and the libraries and different things like that. So it's kind of wild to actually see them here, and they kind of look like, I always imagined them in my memory that they were much bigger than they are. You know, they're just people here who do some stuff. So there is a bit of nostalgia here, but it's one of those things where he doesn't quite have time to sit back and marvel at the Avengers fighting against, you know, the forces of Kang the Conqueror. Instead, Kang, like younger Kang, ends up going into the vessel. Now, it's one of these things, and this is a really, really important aspect of this. He says, so as the Avengers fought Kang with shield and hammer, I approached not as Alexander, but as Odysseus. I made Kang's time ship know me as a friend, for none could access its arsenal but Kang. Perhaps, as I recall it now, that moment was the first time I was truly him. And the reason why he says that, and the reason why this is so significant, is because over the course of this story, younger Kang has been doing everything he can to prevent himself from becoming older Kang the Conqueror, from like becoming that villain. It's a cool thing here, because in the midst of this battle, of course, the Avengers kind of get the upper hand. Kang's ship is on the verge of getting ready to take off, and younger Kang ends up confronting older Kang. So, like the videos that we've done in the past, we'll refer to younger Kang as Nathaniel, and older Kang is just Kang, right? We'll just call him that. So, the thing about this is that Kang does not recognize Nathaniel Richards, and the reason why he doesn't recognize him is because Kang has not met him yet. Now, I know it sounds confusing as hell. This is why I say Kang stories, man, you have to really approach these carefully, like especially if I'm making a video about this, I have to approach it very, very carefully, because I could just blow through it the way that we normally do with stories. It would confuse the piss out of you. So here is a super simple explanation to why it is that Kang does not know Nathaniel. So in a previous video, we talked about how Kang, despite only being probably in his 30s or so, has traveled back and forth through time a ton of times. And as a result of that, you could argue he's cumulatively lived 1,000 lifetimes. And so it's very, very easy to just forget things. Now, what's important about this is that Kang the Conqueror, at this point in his history, has not traveled back back to find his younger self and basically train his younger self and teach him everything he needs to know to prevent him from losing. This is the point in the story when Kang the Conqueror is facing off against the Avengers and losing. So he hasn't come to this realization, what if I just go back and grab my younger self and basically correct all my mistakes in that younger self, so when my younger self becomes me, they won't have all the flaws that I have now. They'll be a better version of me, so they never make the same mistakes and they ultimately come out on top, right? That's why Kang does not remember Nathaniel, because he hasn't met him yet, because he hasn't come up with that idea to grab Nathaniel and teach him everything he needs to know to ensure that Kang does not lose in these various fights that he engages in. Now, the thing about this is, remember, Nathaniel doesn't want to become Kang. So even though he accesses the ship by pretending to be Kang and so on and so forth, he still stands against him, right? And one of the things to keep in mind is he still harbors a lot of love for Ravonna Renslayer. And he's still very, very mad about the fact that she died in ancient Egypt because of the actions of Kang when he was pretending or operating under the moniker of Rama-tut. And so what he says is that his intention is to eradicate Kang, right? To kill Kang here and now on this ship. And by doing so, it would remove him from the time stream in its entirety. At that point, he would go back into the past in ancient Egypt and he would save the life of Ravonna Renslayer. Because if he were to go back in the past and save the life of Ravonna, Kang would always end up back there because it's just his history. He would always become Rama-tut, he would always exist in ancient Egypt, and that situation with how Ravonna died would always repeat itself. But if he can kill Kang, and by doing so, purge him from the time stream in its entirety, then ultimately he can go back to ancient Egypt, he can save the life of Ravonna, live a life with her, and never have to worry about Kang showing up there to wreak havoc in any capacity because he's dead, right? Like there's no Kang to travel back and forth in time anymore. And so the response of Kang is, that's insane. Like, do you have any idea what you would do if you did that, right? Like I'm so ingrained in the time stream, you would quite literally break time itself. But if I didn't exist and you killed me, it would destroy time. There has to always be a Kang. There needs to always be a Kang the Conqueror traveling back and forth through time, engaging in these different things, because this is how it's supposed to work. It's kind of ambiguous and it's very metatextual in terms of how it's explained, but really it points to the greater argument here that in Marvel Comics, there does always have to be a Kang, right? Kang always comes into existence. It always ends up that way. I mean, I guess maybe there's a universe out there where there is no Kang the Conqueror, but that universe has never been seen, right? Kang always exists in every universe across the multiverse, seemingly every single time. Now, what's crazy is that in the midst of this argument between the two, suddenly they're met by the arrival of Victor Von Doom, of Dr. Doom's son. Now, here's a cool thing, right? Dr. Doom would normally never intervene here, and he certainly probably wouldn't take the risk of showing up and confronting Kang the Conqueror in his own ship, where he's at his most powerful. But the opportunity is too good of a chance to pass up. That Dr. Doom, watching the entire conflict between Kang and the Avengers, and even being able to see what's going on here using sorcery and mysticism and whatnot, came to the realization there's two Kangs here. There is Kang from the future and Kang from the past, right? His younger self. If he can eradicate both, then ultimately it would save Doom a lot of hassle and grief, and Kang like standing in his way regarding domination. Because one of the things to know is that it's kind of an unofficial competition between Doom and Kang, in the sense that like Dr. Doom wants to conquer the world, but so does Kang the Conqueror. And so they usually end up bumping heads in terms of their various schemes. There is a kind of respect among them. It's grudging in the sense where Doom like respects what it is that Kang's capable of, and Kang respects Doom. Then there's also the link that Marvel has kind of created or teased, but never actually solidified, that Kang the Conqueror may very well be descended from Dr. Doom. We never get a definitive answer on that. We don't know if that's actually the case, but regardless of the situation, Doom sees this as a chance to take out two birds with one stone. And so what you have is a massive battle that basically takes place between the three of them to a degree. Now, when I say to a degree, it's because it's really more Kang the Conqueror trying to take out Dr. Doom, and then it's Nathaniel trying to reason with Kang. And the reason why he says that is because he says, look, ultimately the immediate threat here is Dr. Doom, but you in your future will come back and find me. And when you find me, you're going to take me through the time stream, and you're going to try to correct all the flaws in yourself by correcting those flaws in me, teaching me those lessons. Never love, different things along those lines, right? Love is a weakness. The fact that you fell in love with Ravonna Renslayer is what led to you becoming as weak and incapable as you are. If I don't have any of those weaknesses, I will become ruthless in a way that you never were. I will become every ounce conqueror. But at the end of the day, I can just teach you those things myself. I come from what is in effect your future. right? Like, I know your history. I know what happens to you. Like, I know these conflicts, right? I know what happens to you running all the way up until like the 31st century. So I know how your battles with the Avengers will unfold. I know all that stuff. So just let me teach you those things, right? Let me teach you how you lost so that you can win. And so as a result of that, the bargain is struck. The deal is made. Kang says, okay. They basically end up ejecting Dr. Doom from the ship using time mechanics. And then once Dr. Doom's out of the picture, the response of Kang is, okay, let's do this. And the response of Nathaniel is no, right? Doom was 100% right. Kang is not to be trusted. Your time is done. And he fires on him. He literally executes his older self, right? Just kills him right there and then shoots him to death. And it's just this amazing moment where Kang says, Kang is dead, long live Kang. And the argument that he makes here, what he's basically saying is, you are gonna become me. There's no way you're not. There's no way you can't, right? Like, you are doing exactly what I would have done, right? Like, whether you know it or not, you are walking headlong into this role. You're walking headlong into becoming Kang. And so that's what's so funny here, because at this point, once Kang is dead, Nathaniel says, okay, now I can execute my plan. I can don the moniker of Rama-tut, and I can go back to ancient Egypt, and I can save the life of Ravana Renslayer. I won't use the diode ray that forces her to bend to my will. Instead, like, I will conquer Egypt, right? I will see my younger self. So in effect, it's exactly everything that we saw happening in the last video that we covered. It's all unfolding. The difference here is that the motivation of Rama-tut is different, but everything else is the exact same, right? His younger self is there, so on and so forth. And he tells Ravana, like, okay, so like basically, I'm gonna take you to a place where I'm gonna keep you safe, right? I'm gonna take you to the Citadel. It's gonna keep you safe. Everything's gonna be fine, but he still operates as Rama-tut. By all standards of measurement, he's still a villain because it's the role he has to play in order to save the life of Ravana. You see how he's falling down this path of becoming Kang, right? Like, you see how like he's just continually becoming this guy. And that's when the Fantastic Four show up and they see him as Rama-tut. The fight unfolds. And so he says, I did exactly what Kang the Conqueror would have done, right? What Rama-tut did initially, I fled. So regardless of the fact that he's trying to do things differently, in the end, he's doing them the exact same way. The timeline unfolds the exact same way. And that's really the bigger focus here, is that time is not something you can just control and manipulate however you want to. It has a finite form and function. It starts at A and it ends at Z. And that there are things that happen in between where you can kind of fudge them a little bit. But at the end of the day, there are fixed points in the universe's history that cannot be changed, that cannot be modified, they cannot be adjusted. There are universal constants that have to exist in the universe. Kang the Conqueror is a universal constant. Rama-tut's existence is a universal point in the time stream. That cannot be adjusted. It always happens. How it is that he wants it to happen is irrelevant, but it always happens, right? He basically, like, no matter what would take place here, no matter what his thought process would be, no matter what would happen, it would be him traveling back as Rama-tut, and he would give people science, but he would still be Rama-tut. There's no way to escape that. So what ends up happening is once he flees and gets away as best he can, he ends up in the far-flung future in 4000 AD. And the first person he's greeted by is Ravana Renslayer, which begs the question, how did Ravana Renslayer survive from the days of ancient Egypt to now? With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Again, I don't know about you guys, I love this Kang the Conqueror story. It's the single greatest Kang story that I've ever read in my life. Absolutely love it. So yeah, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.